Hello, thanks for coming. My name's Rebecca Mazzei, and I'm the Deputy Director at MOCAD, and I'm a co-curator on Vision in a Cornfield. I'm going to go down the line and introduce some of my colleagues here. Dianetta Dye is sitting right next to me. Dianetta is an artist in the Ogun crew, who's one of the collectives that's featured in the exhibition, and she's an incredible artist, independently as well. I should mention also that the Ogun crew, I don't know if you read the signage or not, is also sometimes known as Kelp Canoe Collective, or Kelp Canoe Spirit, which is an anagram for Blackwing. And then sitting directly next to her is Lashley. Lester's a founding member of the AACM based in Chicago, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians. Directly next to him is Saffell Gardner, who's part of the Ogun collective. Leith's going to shut off the cars. And Saffell is a co-curator on this project as well. And then Leith is absent, but Leith is a member of Apetechnology, which is an electromechanical collective that works with electronics and robotics, located at the Destroy compound, which is over by the Recycle Here Center on Trumbull. And then next to him is kind of the man behind this exhibition, Cary Loren. Cary's an artist. He's a member of the anti-rock collective Destroy All Monsters, and he's also the owner of the independent bookstore in Southfield, Bookbeat. Psych art, anti-rock. It's hard to find a name for Destroy All Monsters. It kind of defies names. So, I didn't really have a formal plan for this talk, but I thought maybe the first thing we could do is sort of go down the line, and you guys could each explain your collectives, just give a sort of brief synopsis of the work that you each do. Or Cary, you have another idea?
I guess I could give a brief intro to what DAM was about. It was a collective that began with myself and Mike Kelley and Jim Shaw and Niagara in, I believe it was 1973, 1974, around that time, in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And we just were the kind of weirdo artists of the area. And if you could remember what Ann Arbor was like, around that time, the hippies had already left. It was very, it was just a real frat row kind of scene. It was very boring. And so I had come back from New York City, where I had a kind of an internship with an artist named Jack Smith. And I had been making movies and writing to him in high school. And so that artist really inspired what I was doing. He was kind of my mentor. And that aesthetic was brought back to Ann Arbor.
That's where I met Mike and Jim. And we already had our own art thing kind of underway. And I had a loft where I was doing theater and films and all sorts of things with other people in the area. And so that's how it's essentially began, and we began adding music and noise and tearing apart instruments and making up our own instruments from toys. Mike and Jim were really good at tearing open stuffed animals and getting the voice boxes out of them, and then we'd amplify them and distort them through distortion pedals and echo plexes. Jim was an amazing guitarist, but he didn't know how to play guitar. He was the first kind of musician that I knew. We got our inspiration a lot from Shaky Jake, who was like a street musician in Ann Arbor. He was a friend of ours, and he'd eat with us in our house, in our commune and stuff. So we were very much a kind of a street commune where anybody could come in and play with us or perform with our band. And so we did this for a few years in Ann Arbor, and then Mike and Jim left for California. I started doing things on my own or with another group called Nightcrawlers in Detroit. And then in the early 90s, we started hearing noise come out of Japan. The boredoms became very big, and there were a lot of noise people listening to stuff. So then we decided to put out our music, and Thurston Moore was very interested in it, and he had a label called Ecstatic Peace, and he put out a 3 CD set that kind of resurrected our band again. And then we started to do installation art again and, music again. And one of the projects that we did in early 2000 was this swamp gas project. We were always involved in like UFOs and extraterrestrials, and ghosts and spirits, and that was part of our group. And so this swamp gas is based on an actual incident in Dexter. And when we talked about that, around that time, we were assisting a friend of ours, Cameron Jamie, on a film he was making called Spook House with Art Angel. And I was taking him around to different cities all over Michigan to film spook houses, because it was a unique thing that kind of started in Michigan and then expanded across the country and the world right now. And so it was a unique, regional kind of art form, the spook house thing. And then we were at one of these places in Fowlerville. Mike and I heard this huge noise coming from a field, and it was a car that was humping, just jumping up and down, and nobody was in it. And it was making this incredible loud noise coming from the trunk. Indistinguishable, you couldn't, it was just a thudding, rattle. And so I filmed it, and it had a purple light glowing inside it and under it. It really looked like a UFO to us. And so I filmed it and everything, and then we talked about this as doing an installation of moving cars that would play our own music and that would dance to our sounds, essentially. And that's essentially what we had here. And then I'd like Leith to talk next about, because he really created the motion that's really central to the idea. And then, before I let Leith talk, I have to talk about Ibn and the connection with Ogin, okay? Because that was the next thing that happened, because I realized that to have this, I realized that Ibn was already doing this in a way in Detroit with his, I'm not sure I could say the collective's name, or is it called Ogun? Okay, we'll just call it Ogun. Well, it's also known as the Club New Canoe Spirit. And so I thought that I knew Saffell for many, many years from the bookstore and we did a Sun Ra exhibition there years ago, and he was good friends with Ibn and part of the group. So we had talked about this, and Ibn was an off and on, a very curious fellow that would come into the store and look at voodoo books, and then we'd have a discussion, and and it was always very interesting to me, and I never really got to know him very well, but I did have some meetings with him where he gave me catalogs and said he was very interested in doing the collaboration. And so Mike liked the idea of this, and so we just pursued it. And even though Ibn had this stroke, 2008, a very, very heavy stroke, I knew he wouldn't be able to do this, but Saffell and I talked to him, and we communicated the idea, and he was very willing to let Saffell kind of monitor the project with Dianetta and the rest of and Lester, the rest of the group that was still around.
Maybe Saffell and Lester and Dye can talk a little bit about the founding of Ogun before we move on to just so
okay.
Is that cool?
That's a good.
Just so people know
that's a
what
good
Ibn was doing.
We'll keep the chronology kind of correct that way. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I've known know Ibn for years, back, from the 80s, early 80s, maybe even late 70s. Yeah, early 80s, maybe even late 70s. And we got together maybe into the 80s and decided we were going to do a show together. And we said, okay, well, if we're going to do a show, let's do a poster or a print. So he had a printmaking workshop over on Hamilton. So we started, doing a series of prints. So it just took off from there, where we did these collaboration prints. We did them in Detroit, and also we did them in New York at Bob Blackburn's Printmakers Workshop. So we did several series of those, and Ibn was also a marathoner, and he would train out at Rouge Park and Ballard. But at Rouge Park, he would come across these cars that had been, torched and burned out. So he came up with the idea to more or less resurrect these cars and dedicate them to people that had, musicians that had fallen, or activists or things like that. So
It was a time when cars also weren't worth very much.
right. And people would just like, they would just get torched, like maybe, I don't know, insurance jobs or whatever. I don't know what they did, but we would find them in parks, and they would be in the Rouge River, kind of submerged, and you could see they had been burned out. So from that beginning, we started getting together Lester and Deity and also Howard Mallory out of Chicago. We would bring him in on some projects, and we had a couple other people, but they kind of faded out on us a little bit. But we would also go to Jamaica, Boston. We did a couple projects. One at Cranbrook, one at the Charles Wright Museum. So these projects were, we wanted to, it's sort of like recycling, and that's what we did. But as time went on, these cars were kind of just like pulled out and yanked away. They just disappeared. But we would do a ritual. Ibn would go and pick up musicians around the city.
Talk about the musician aspect.
And the musical aspect. So he would go and get people like Farouk Zibay, Skeeter Shelton, Kenny Green, and they would just improvise. And Ibn would do a libation around the car, and the artist would build a shrine, and we would bring in some dancers. Sometimes Ibn would disappear, and he'd come back with dancers during, while the ceremony was going on. And from that point, the whole thing just was improvised, and we would photograph it and video tape the piece. And that's part of what, brought this show together. Some of the videotapes I was able to find and put together, and then some of the photographs that Deity had, we were able to give them to Cary, and Cary edited a whole bunch of things together. So
what amazed me too was Ibn's talent, not only in film, but in music. Especially his voice he had an incredible sonorous voice that was really quite beautiful, and rapping, and also writing the music himself. And
yeah, I think that goes back to the background. I think his father had been a preacher, and he still had that growl. Ibn had that growl in his voice, and he was a heck of a storyteller. People would sit mesmerized, and he would come up with these stories when he was a child, and his father, he would run several blocks away from home to get his father to toss him up in the air several times, and come to find out he would do that because his brother would be waiting at home so he could get tossed in the air by his father after a day of work. So they were trying to compete, with each other to see who could get tossed in the air the most. But he would tell stories like that to people, just really, really tight personal family stories. And he was open like that too.
So the project really came together when, actually, maybe more than a decade ago, when you had first originally discussed the idea, but then it was only recently that we actually thought about animating it. And I thought Leith could talk a little bit about Apetechnology's background, and then we can talk about how the shows come together.
Okay. Apetechnology, I guess the founding member could be said to be Chip, who came from San Fran. Well, he was originally from Port Huron, Michigan, moved out to San Fran for a decade or more, and worked with Mark Pauline, worked with Survival Research Laboratories, but he was his group, People Hater, was one of the only parallel organizations that was allowed to work with survival research. And while Chip was out there, he also got a lot of prop work, working in various live animations and whatnot. So after a while, he came back to Detroit and he'd set up his shop, and he was kind of just living, doing a little bit of work here and there, and he started Apetechnology, which was more of a musical venture than SRL was very destructive robots, lots of
Yeah, maybe, do you want to
flamethrowers
give just a brief for people who don't know Mark Pauline or his work? Just
Oh,
what that's
sure.
about?
SRL and Mark Pauline, they it was late 70s, early 80s when they first got their start, I want to say, and they built brutal monsters and things that shoot 30-foot columns of flame, and they would attack each other, and it was just a mind-blowing post-apocalyptic scene. This is all before, Matrix or anything like that, or even Robot Wars, only just barely wish they could be kind of like SRL. I mean, these things were... Chip still got one of his machines, and it's called the Triangle Machine, and you can take apart a car in under, 3 minutes or so with this thing. It's got 4-foot-long chains with links about that big around on it, and they spin it about 200 or 300 revolutions per minute. It's a scary thing to watch. And we still do a little bit of flames. We got one instrument that shoots flames. Every good musical instrument should shoot flames, but so that's where they got their start. They converted backhoes. They would convert, large industrial equipment. Those big pinchers you see where they cut down trees with? Well, they cut each other's robots up with those things. So that's where Chip got his start and came back to town, and he was kind of moving beyond. He still likes the dark gestalt, but moving beyond the sheer destructiveness. And just about 3 years or so ago, for Maker Faire, I started helping him out, and I brought a. That's where I first saw you. And that's where Cary first saw us doing our thing. I brought 16 years of musical experience and composition experience and MIDI control experience and whatnot, which is something he'd been looking for in his machines. He's mostly hand controlling, and then also Brad came, and he's a journeyman licensed electrician, which is really helpful when you're running these large voltage installations like this. And so we got together and we started making strange musical instruments and putting together performances. I had a few shows here, got a few shows around town, get asked out, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been a real learning experience for all of us. It's a really nice cross-pollination and really fun guys to work with. And then, what was the late spring or so, these guys showed up and asked us if we could do this full automation, these dancing cars, which was kind of right up our alley because we'd already been working on inventing these musical instruments, these mechanical musical instruments, and we're like, well, this is perfect. We can tie it right in with the show right away. The real big leap was making it automated to last 3 months and not get boring, and to kind of try and generate new content, or at least randomly generate new content over a period of 3 months, at least for the poor souls who work here, so they don't have to listen to the same sound loop over and over and over again for 3-4 months. That'd be torture. And so that's what brought us here. Full computerized automation with random elements and some composed tableaus that run the car and involve all of the sound samples are actually from Cary and from Destroy All Monsters. So he kind of curated the sound, and I just kind of organized the way that it pops out of the installation. So.
I wanted to say one thing about the sound too, is that originally the concept that Mike and I had was to digitize our sound library, and we had thousands of sound samples, and they were all on floppy disks. And so the Mike Kelley Foundation was able to generously transfer these samples and get them to us, but we weren't able to get them to, our fantasy was to have electronic musicians, like techno musicians, make music out of the samples. So it would be their own music, but it would be filtered through our sounds. But we weren't able to do that in time, so I just kind of quickly made these little compositions up, and then Leith is able to kind of randomize where they're popping in and out, and the pitch is changing, and different things that he's manipulated.
So, I guess, the show, as it's come together, has been kind of difficult to explain to people because it's kind of an uneasy museum show. I mean, not. We've talked before about how there aren't too many institutions that put together shows of collectives, and then even beyond that, put together a show based on 3 collectives working together. So there are a lot of voices involved there, but I think it actually came together really well. And I mean, maybe you guys can talk about that kind of communal aspect of it.
I think we discussed it before. It worked. I think it worked great because number one, everybody was coming from completely different worlds. So there was not a lot of toes getting stepped on, but also just that we'd all were already in collaborations and already had the skills needed to make a collaboration work and continue. And then when it just became an even bigger collaboration, everybody, it was much easier for everybody to get together and compromise.
I want to say one thing about collectives too, because it's like it's really my only interest in the art world, and has been for many years, one of the major interests. And I would also bet, like, for me, it was the Detroit Artists Workshop in the early 60s in Detroit that became the first collective that I felt I had been really influenced by as a young person growing up in this area. And the more I found out about it, the more I realized that this was kind of like my history, and I began to learn more about this group.
And was that like a formalized structure of any kind, or was it just a group of artists that came together and called themselves the Detroit Artists Workshop?
It was almost like a formal collective. There were like 13 or 14 members that came together. They wrote a manifesto. They had a building. They had rents. They paid dues. It was very organized in a way, and it was what was amazing to me too. It was interracial, and it was different sexes. It was like everything, It was a real reflection of what Detroit was, and so I've always held that as being like what is as this kind of like interesting prototype for a collective. And I'm sure there were many collectives before this, but all the ideas of collectives like Dadaism and Surrealism and Fluxus, these were all other collectives too. And so that's what interested me in Destroy All Monsters and then working with all these other people, because we were really kind of on the same page.
I think one of the things that was kind of important with this particular collaboration is that there's no real egos involved here. And I think the problems that the museums would have with collectives and working with collectives is that individual ego would want to submerge and emerge and become the
I think we
focal
kind of
point.
all realized that we were working for some kind of common goal.
Right.
And it was a very peaceful, very wonderful. I think there were some a few little edges here and there, but it was really kind of very. Well, I got possessed by Mike Kelley's soul for a couple days, and it was like kind of crazy. But I think that we realized that
I think that one of the reasons that I think we all have egos, but
Right.
I think being in a collective, you have the ability to kind of submerge your ego, and that's one of the reasons that I really enjoyed working with Ibn, because he was sort of like a person that was really like spiritual, and he would say, you can do it, whatever you want to do, you can do it, because throughout at least my educational life, as far as going to undergrad and going to grad school and working with different professors and things like that, you get to a point where you find out they don't know everything that you think they should know. And when you find out these things on your own, when you start to educate yourself and you start to bring in other people, you say, oh, okay, there's a broader world out there than that educational world that you were, people say, well, go get your BFA, go get your MFA, and then you run across a guy like Ibn. He got his, he studied at Wayne, undergrad and masters, but then when you find out that there's other people who are doing different things other than that same line of thought, paintings on the wall, sculptures, that kind of thing, and you come together as a collective, you have a tendency where you can submerge your ego and learn, and that's what it is.
Well, that's
And
why
we learned
it's difficult for institutions, because they want to deal with the individual and not
Right.
not a
Right.
collect. They don't understand who did what, or what part was who or what. So it's all very big. That's why I thought the resource room was an
Yeah.
interesting room to have, because we did have our individual works, but they're all mixed up. So
Yeah.
you need to decode it yourself. You know, it's
I
something
think
it looks
that-
good together, but it also is a process of decoding and learning. And it's not maybe that easy to.
That room is also really interesting to me because it doesn't answer any questions, but it just kind of it feeds you information, but it doesn't answer questions in terms of like how these groups sync up. Because one of the things that I think has been really interesting through this whole process is kind of, I mean, being trained as a sort of amateur art historian, one of the things that I've been trying to struggle with is how do these groups meet up in terms of content? Because, you know, obviously you have the sci-fi background with Destroy All Monsters. You guys are really dealing with African culture directly and this abandonment of sort of the Western understanding of
African
art
culture and
making.
sci-fi culture are very similar, though. They
Right.
have a very kind of cosmology that's like
It's a similar cosmology for sure, but it also could be seen, I think we've talked a little bit about like what you guys are doing is like serious work to you, like this is your life. And a lot of people see like the B movie and the sci-fi stuff as like some kind of irony, but for you guys it's not really irony. I mean, it's also a way of life for you. I think in Destroy All Monsters, that's what I've like realized through the process is that you guys really don't make a distinction between the work and your life, because I mean, even, was it Mike or Jim that is interested in the UFOology, you know,
well, all of us.
the religion, like has created the UFO religion? I can't remember, wasn't there one?
Mike wrote a paper on UFOology, but
Yeah.
all of us, like, I mean, there are UFO religions. We're all kind of interested in that.
Yeah.
But I think as a way of research and not as a way of worship or anything. I'm just saying that
Yeah.
all of these kind of ideas that come out of Afrofuturism is what I'm going to call it, because that's what it is. And that, you know, I mean, if you research like the Dogon and Egyptology and all of these things, you see where these ideas really kind of emanate from.
Mm-hmm.
And they do have origins, real origins that are in books.
Mm-hmm. But Lester, I don't know if you want to respond to this, but I'd like to get your voice
I'd like
out there a
Lester
little
to
bit.
talk about
Yeah.
the AACM and where the hell that came from. I mean, that was around the same time, a little bit after the Artist Workshop, but it was a parallel thing, and there were a lot of overlaps between the Detroit Workshop and the AACM with Joseph Jarman. I don't know if he could.
Yeah, or maybe just even talking a little bit about how music and the visual arts collide in your work and in Ogun's work.
Well, music, well, hey, no, you won't. You understand that? Anybody? No? Well, anybody understand that? Can you feel the spirit? It's all about spirit to me. You know, when I came here, I don't know what they talked about before I got here in terms of collaboration, but when I got here, I started working. I didn't talk with anybody about anything, but Leith and these people were in there doing what they do, flipping and flapping and making the cars jump around and noise and sounds coming out. And I saw some things, and I wanted to add some things to what we were doing and see how that movement that they were creating, I could enhance it. And I spoke with them and some of his crew, complete cooperation, you know, and we didn't talk. So there's something in the spirit. Everything is in the spirit. You know, I'm out of Chicago. I am a musician, self-trained, and a visual artist, studied at the Art Institute of Chicago. A charter member of the AACM, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians out of Chicago, who play great black music, as we call it. People want to call it jazz or avant-garde, but those are misnomers. It's just black people doing what they do to raise the spirit, because everything is about raising the spirit. You know, I heard the word religion mentioned a little while ago, but that's one way of trying to raise the spirit, but oftentimes it's not really centered on spirit. You know, black people, and we all out of Africa, the bush, and we call ourselves urban bush people. And I'm an urban bushman. And Detroit City and Chicago, that's the bush, the urban bush. We take materials from the urban bush, such as you see in the other room. Bottle caps and plastic and bottles and all manner of things. Miss Deity is a master of it, as well as Saffell. But Ibn is the master of masters. He can touch anything and make it sing. Speaking of singing, I was also a member of his band unit number 10, which he had many band units comprised of different guys, like here in Detroit. And we played at a lot of the openings and other events in the city. So Ibn crosses across genres of things, and but he all ties it all into one thing. His speech is his vocalizing and his visualizing and the raising of the spirit. Yeah, give yourself a hand. Because, hey, when you raise the spirit that's in the room, you have to respond. You can't sit still. You must respond. Thank you.
All right. I think that's good.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions or want to talk about anything else?
Pardon? Ogun?
About the deity or about the group? The group? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, when we came together and to work on the cars, we also did murals also, and you know, Ibn was a big driving force behind that, and I think you know, I went to school, undergrad at Wayne, grad at Wayne, and I think he helped me elevate myself, you know, far above what I learned in school, and I had to unlearn a lot of stuff to work with Ibn, but you know, I also teach too, so I also know, you know, whatever the institutional education thing was, and I also educated myself through, you know, what I wanted to do, and also along with Ibn, but it's just that force that we work with, and when we all work together, it's just like when we came in here, and Leith and Apetechnology, they were doing certain things, and Cary, he was buzzing around, just throwing out ideas, like almost like a pixie. He would say, well, we should do this or we should do that, and then also Dabls came in, he put the mirrors in, and it was almost like the whole thing was kind of orchestrated. So from working with Ibn and Ogun and putting those ideas together, I think he allowed us a certain level, or to believe in ourselves, a certain level of creative freedom, where there was really nothing wrong as far as what medium you wanted to work in or what technique you wanted to use. Ibn would just work. I remember there were times when I worked with Ibn in New York in the printmaker's workshop. We would work we would be up on the 23rd floor in this building in Soho or whatever. And, if you leave the press, you have to clean up everything. And so we would work like for 18 hours, and we would barely speak because it was that thing going on. And he brought that kind of spirit to Ogun, and that's the way we work. And I noticed when Leith and Chip and Brad, when they would work together, sometimes you wouldn't hear them talking until they got together and they needed to know certain things, and this is a large area for them to run their wires and things like that. And sometimes they'd just walk back and forth, and every once in a while you hear one of them yell, and then one time you see one of them walking, and then they just disappear. And we kind of do the same thing, and that kind of collaboration, when you're working with a group, that kind of it was almost like
that's when you
orchestration.
That's when you know a collaboration is good too, when you don't have to communicate with words anymore.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to also mention that, just more specifically in terms of Ogun, could you guys describe, because I remember one time we were talking about the way it actually transpired when you were doing the cars out there, and you said it would take about a day, and you would do kind of performance while you were working together on it. That was kind of an important part of it.
Yeah, all of the happenings, or whatever you would like to label them, would take place, and they'd start off with just kind of a gathering of all the artists. We'd get together, we'd have a site, and we'd all bring our own individual things. Like I would bring fingernail polish and crayons and bottle caps and raffia. Just anything that I would find, nails, rusty things, and smashed up beer cans and things of that nature. Saffell would bring, his thing. Lester would bring things that made noise, and, we'd put popcorn in bottles, and we'd attach it. We'd make things fly and do all sorts of things. So those happenings would get to a certain point. We'd start working on a car or a wall or something, and it would get to a certain point. We wouldn't be talking. We'd just be doing what we do. And then something would kind of fly into us, and, it would be time for us to stop and time for music to start. And so then music would start to happen. And then from the music, we'd go back to, visual. So it was always this kind of call and response between music and spiritualness and visualization. So that's kind of what would happen. And it happens every time. It happened here. So it's kind of like a celebration of things, and those things that were what we called dead or abandoned or submerged would start to come out, and they'd start to take on a second life, a third life, fourth life, and so on. And so that, for me, is part of why I like to do the collaborations, I guess. Just that feeling, it just feels really good and makes you feel good, and that ability to communicate by not really verbal means, that nonverbal communication. It's just kind of like this connection, almost like telepathy.
Communicate by not communicating.
Exactly.
And I think that was a commonality that we shared. That was kind of an unspoken commonality, but
Right.
both our groups are we use, and that's why this is a particularly Detroit show. You couldn't. It'd be hard to do this anyplace else because there's no place else where there is such a plethora of unused automobiles and a plethora of, Chip has this amazing talent of looking at a giant heap of metal and picking out every useful little thing from 100 yards. Like here in Detroit, I don't know if anybody's ever been in the plants. I've been in the plants, but when they take apart an assembly line, they don't take it apart nicely and keep all the good parts. They just go in there and rip it down and smash it to pieces and throw it in a big pile. And so there's no place else in the world where that much tech is available too. So we're also taking old assembly lines. I'll just sit on it. So we're giving life to the old assembly lines too, and all the old tools that have also been discarded. This town is just full of discarded tools, pneumatics, all the valves that we use, like on our roll-around sculptures. Those are all discarded wheelchairs. It's just, and it's only in this town where there's that much discard, like this detritus of Western civilization that we can just pick over gleefully and use all the parts. And so that's a commonality that we share, is bringing life to dead things. Yeah, once again, urban bushmen. It's just kind of, I mean, Chip heats the shop by roaming around the neighborhoods with his chainsaw and taking down deadfalls. So it's a different.
And I think too with the collaboratives, the collectives, you have to allow yourself to free up on these things and bring them together. The collective, and we collect found things. I could ride in the car with Dee, and we'll be on the freeway, and she said, "There's a hubcap." I said, "We'll get it on the way back, and then we'll pass it on the way back." And I said, "Oh, we passed it again." Well, we'll find another hubcap. But back to Ogun, when we would get together, it would almost be. It wouldn't be like really a private thing, because we would let people come in, kids and people in the neighborhood and things like that, to work on the projects. But also we would talk. And I know Lester, he has worked in the human care industry. I don't know if that's a good word for it, but the help, helping taking kids out, disabled kids out to the park and talking to them and teaching with them. And one of the things that we talked about was the whole recycling thing, and we talked about how this is like a throwaway society, and then Lester would say, yeah, well, they throw away people too. So that's another part of our group, that we were always inclusive of anybody that wanted to come in, but what we didn't want to allow is somebody to come in and it says, oh, this is all about me, look at me, and that kind of thing. It would all have to be a collective. And that's the way we work.
Can you also talk just for a second about the Kelp Canoe, like these anagrams and the hieroglyphs and the language that he would collect, Ibn? I mean, because Ibn was a collector of names as well, and he would change language by adding Z's on it, which stood for his mom, Zenobia.
Right.
And can you talk a little bit about what he did with language that appears on the cars? And
yeah, well, some of the language was from they were called insipidity symbols. They were from a funerary, like African funerary writings. There were different things that meant death or passage or spirit. One that you might see repeated on several of the cars is a big umbrella with a piece of cloth under it, and that symbolized the passing of a chief. So, because if you see some things about documentaries in Africa where they'll show the chief and he'll be sitting and there'll be an umbrella over him. So when he passes, his robe and his umbrella would be marched in a procession. So a lot of the things that we use were also dealt with Flash of the Spirit, because that was one of the books that we also like to read and talk about and talk about some of the translations that Robert Ferris Thomas talked about. And then there's other books that we would we would try to not transcribe them, but we would try to get the actual idea of what these different symbols meant. And then like Rebecca was saying, Ibn, he would come up with different titles of things, and he would add Z's at the end of them. As far as when we talked about our monuments, it would be urban monuments with a Z. And a lot of his poetry, a lot of his writings, he would change them to Z's and things like now. And I think at that time he was really ahead of his time, because a lot of things are shortened up when people text. Instead of using your, people use you are and things like that. So he kind of shortened up the language a lot of times, maybe to expedite the way he felt about different things. And so we kind of like you know, use that and pick that up and try to, you know, get into that part too. So, question? Okay.
We can do that now. Bert,
Yep.
you feel good? Okay,
Good?
Yep.
let's go.
Okay.
Thank you.